Dawn broke over eastern Tennessee at 6:12, sky bleeding pink and orange through mist that clung to the valley like something that refused to let go. Inside Mercer & Sons Firearms, fluorescent lights flickered on at 5:47, 13 minutes before the sign would flip to open. Robert Williams moved through the shop with the confidence of someone who'd never been told he might be wrong about something important. 26 years old, lean from metabolism rather than effort, wearing a vintage Gunsmith's apron his grandfather left behind when cancer took him in 2022. The leather had worn soft at the edges, fit like inheritance was supposed to fit, like proof he belonged here. The shop smelled like it always did this early. Hops No. 9 solvent, gun oil with that specific petroleum sweetness, old wood, metal polish, faint chemical bite of bluing compound. Robert poured coffee from the pot he'd started before unlocking the back door. Black, no sugar. Drank it standing at the front counter, scrolling through overnight security footage on the tablet mounted beside the register. Nothing. Never was. The shop sat on a rural highway 20 minutes outside Knoxville, surrounded by farmland and forest. Break-ins were rare enough that checking felt like ritual rather than necessity. 643 days working in this shop. Same routine every morning. Coffee, security check, wipe down the display cases. The cases held handguns arranged by era and manufacturer. Colt 1911s, Browning high powers, a nickel-plated Smith & Wesson Model 29 that had been there longer than Robert had been alive. He cleaned the glass in horizontal strokes, never circular, left to right, top to bottom. His grandfather told him once that circular motions left streaks. Robert couldn't remember if that was true, but the habit stuck anyway. At 6:30, he walked to the back corner where a locked filing cabinet sat against the wall. Olive drab metal, military surplus style, covered in dust that never seemed to accumulate beyond a certain point. Label across the front drawer read, Estate Archive pre-1980 in faded typewriter letters. He'd asked his grandfather about it once, years ago. Old inventory records from when Daniel Mercer ran the place, nothing important. The cabinet stayed locked. Robert ran his hand across the top, felt dust on his fingertips, wiped them on his jeans. Above the workbench near the back, an old rotary phone hung on the wall. Cream-colored plastic gone yellow with age, cord coiled down like something waiting. In 643 days, Robert had never heard it ring. Didn't know if it still worked. Seemed like the kind of thing that should be thrown away, but his grandfather told him to leave it, so it stayed. A photograph sat tucked behind the cash register, wedged between the counter and the credit card reader. Small, maybe 4 by 6 inches. Image blurry, faded to sepia tones. 7 people in military uniforms standing beside wooden crates in what looked like jungle clearing. Their faces were indistinct, washed out by sun glare or age or both. Robert had looked at it 1,000 times, could never make out details. Didn't know who they were. Another relic his grandfather told him to leave alone. At 7, the first customer arrived. Dale Pritchard, regular who brought in a Remington 700 every 6 weeks like clockwork to have the scope recalibrated. Dale was 60-something, retired from something he never specified, talked too much about things that didn't matter. Robert mounted the rifle in the vise, checked the bore, adjusted the windage. Dale leaned against the counter, drank the coffee Robert offered out of politeness rather than genuine hospitality. Heard somebody's been asking around town about old military surplus? Dale's voice carried that conspiratorial tone people use when they think they know something interesting. Government-looking types. Suits and wrong shoes. Weird for around here. Robert kept his eyes on the scope adjustment. Collectors do that. Not like this. These boys had that federal look. You know the type. Too clean, too polite. Asking questions about weapons from the 70s and 80s, specifically asking if anyone still had original documentation. Robert's hands paused for half a second, wrench hovering over the turret cap. Then he continued the adjustment. 2 clicks left. Probably ATF doing some audit. Happens sometimes. Dale shrugged, unconvinced but willing to let it drop. Conversation moved on to weather, to hunting season, to his grandson's upcoming birthday. Dale picked up his rifle at 7:42, paid cash, left. Robert returned to the workbench, stood there looking at nothing in particular, then walked back to the filing cabinet, stared at it for 10 seconds before returning to the counter. At 9:15, a young couple came in looking for a carry pistol. Robert showed them 3 options: Glock 43, Smith & Wesson Shield, SIG P365. Explained differences in capacity, recoil, ease of use. Woman chose the Glock. Standard choice. Robert processed the background check, sent them on their way with a box of 9mm and a recommendation for the range 2 towns over. At 10:30, Gary Young wandered in. 71. Collector who specialized in Civil War-era firearms, had more money than sense. Spent half his retirement driving to gun shows and estate sales looking for rare pieces. Came into Robert's shop twice a week to talk about things he'd found or wanted to find. Robert tolerated him because Gary bought enough to justify the patience required. Gary positioned himself at the counter, started talking about a Springfield trapdoor rifle he'd seen at an estate sale in Chattanooga. Robert half listened, nodding at appropriate intervals, cleaning a Colt Python someone had brought in for maintenance. At 11:18, the bell above the door chimed. Robert looked up from the Python, saw an elderly black man step inside. Moved slowly, not with frailty exactly, but with deliberate care, like someone conserving energy or choosing each step with purpose. Canvas jacket that had seen better decades, faded jeans, work boots caked with red clay, hair gray, close cropped, face lined deep but not soft, sharp cheekbones, eyes that tracked the room in a way that felt methodical. He carried something wrapped in an old wool blanket, olive drab, military issue color. Robert barely glanced at him. Gary was talking about the trapdoor's condition, the asking price, whether it was worth the drive back to Chattanooga. The man walked to the counter and stopped. Didn't say anything, just stood there holding the bundle. Robert kept cleaning the Python. "You need help finding something?" The man didn't answer immediately. He placed the bundle on the counter with both hands. Motion was controlled, measured descent like someone setting down something fragile or dangerous. He unwrapped it slowly. The rifle appeared inch by inch. Rust covered every visible surface. Metal was dark, oxidized to the point of looking black in places. Barrel showed pitting and corrosion deep enough to see from 3 feet away. Wood stock was split lengthwise, crack running from the butt plate to the forestock. Grain was swollen, warped from moisture exposure that must have lasted years. Looked like something pulled from a swamp or a flooded basement. Robert set down the Python, looked at the rifle, looked at the man. He smiled. Not unkindly, but the way someone smiles at a well-meaning mistake. "Sir, I appreciate you bringing this in, but this thing is scrap metal. Honestly, not even safe to display. Wood's split, metal's compromised. You tried to fire this, it'd probably blow up in your hands." From across the store, Gary chuckled, that condescending sound people make when they're witnessing someone else's ignorance. "Sounds like a lawsuit waiting to happen." Robert picked up the rifle by the barrel with 2 fingers, holding it away from his body like something unpleasant. Metal felt rough under his fingers, texture of deep corrosion. Flakes of rust dusted the counter, scattered like tiny insects. "I can dispose of it for you if you want, but there's no value here. 0. The man said nothing. He watched Robert with eyes that didn't blink as often as they should, something unsettling in the stillness. Robert set the rifle down with a dull thunk. Sound echoed in the shop. 2 other customers had stopped browsing to watch. The man's voice emerged quiet, barely above a whisper. Didn't match the roughness of his appearance. "You might want to check the serial number before you throw it away." Robert laughed. Genuine amusement, not cruelty, just the reflex of someone who knows his field. "Sir, trust me, I've been doing this since I was 16. I know junk when I see it." The man didn't move, didn't smile, didn't break eye contact. "The serial number, just check it." The shop had gone quiet. Gary had stopped talking. 2 customers near the shotgun rack were watching now, sensing something shift in the atmosphere. Robert sighed, theatrical, making clear he was doing this as a favor rather than necessity. He grabbed a brass brush from the workbench, bottle of hop solvent, poured a small amount onto a rag. "Fine. Let's see what we've got here." He began scrubbing the receiver where the serial number would be stamped. Brass brush made a scratching sound against oxidized metal. Black and rust-red flakes scattered across the counter. Solvent cut through corrosion slowly, revealing metal underneath degree by degree. Numbers began to appear. Robert scrubbed harder. More numbers emerged from beneath decades of rust. His hand slowed. The serial wasn't standard. Prefix was wrong. Alphanumeric instead of pure numeric. Format didn't match civilian production models. It ended with a dash and a letter. -X. Robert stopped scrubbing, stared at the numbers. GX1847-X. He'd never seen a serial number formatted like that. Not in 10 years of working with firearms, not in all the reference material he'd studied, not in the database he used daily for appraisals. Gary leaned over the counter. "What'd you find?" Robert didn't answer. He pulled his phone from his pocket, opened the firearms database application, entered the serial number. App searched for 3 seconds. Search results. No match. He tried a different database. Military Surplus Registry. Search results. Restricted access. Robert felt something cold move through his chest. He set the phone down, walked to the back office without saying anything. The office was small, more closet than room, desk shoved against one wall, shelves lined with reference books, catalogs, binders full of documentation his grandfather had accumulated over 40 years. Robert pulled down a thick volume from the second shelf. United States Military Small Arms, serial numbers 1945 to 1985. Red cover, edges worn from use. He flipped through pages, found the section on serial number formatting, scanned rows of text. Near the bottom of page 347, a footnote in small print. Serial designations ending in -X, -Y, or -Z were reserved for experimental or classified procurement programs. Records sealed under National Security Directive 47B. Contact Department of Defense Historical Archives for Freedom of Information Act requests. Robert read it twice. The words didn't change. He returned to the counter. The man hadn't moved. Stood in the exact same position, hands resting on the counter edge, watching Robert with that unnerving stillness. Robert picked up the rifle again, this time with care. Examined it differently now, professional eyes instead of dismissive ones. "Where did you get this?" Tone had changed entirely. No more condescension, no more amusement, just direct question requiring direct answer. "It was issued to me." Gary laughed, that same derisive sound. "Sir, I don't know what you're trying to pull, but—" The man turned his head slowly toward Gary, said nothing. The silence that followed was heavier than any response could have been. Gary's laugh died in his throat. Robert ignored the exchange. He was looking at the rifle now, really looking. Grabbed a magnifying glass from the workbench, examined the barrel threading. Not factory standard. Custom work, high-precision machining. He checked the trigger assembly. Match-grade components, adjusted for competition-level accuracy. Ran his fingers along the bolt, felt unusual wear patterns consistent with suppressor use. He looked at the stock. Beneath the split wood and water damage, faint engravings were visible. Letters scratched by hand into the wood, then deliberately scratched over, obscured but not entirely erased. Robert pulled out calipers from the tool drawer, measured the chamber dimensions, checked the barrel twist rate. This was built for long-range precision, match barrel, custom load specifications. This wasn't infantry issue, this was specialized. He trailed off, not wanting to say what he was thinking. The man finished the sentence for him. Sniper platform. Operation Brushfire, 1973 to 1977. Denied area operations. Every person in the shop stopped moving. The two customers froze mid-step. Gary's mouth hung open slightly. Robert stared at the man, trying to process information that didn't fit into any framework he understood. "Officially," the man continued, voice flat and emotionless, "we were never there." Robert felt his pulse in his temples. Brushfire was covert counterinsurgency, classified operations that officially never happened. Most of the program was still sealed. "Most of it is," the man agreed, though Robert hadn't spoken the thought aloud. "Most of us are too, dead or erased." As he spoke, small details emerged that Robert hadn't noticed before. The way the man stood, weight balanced evenly on both feet, shoulders squared. When a car backfired outside on the highway, his head turned toward the sound with mechanical precision, assessed direction, dismissed it, returned to neutral. He used language that felt out of place coming from an elderly man in a rural gun shop. Suppressed fire, mission parameters, windage calculation, cold bore zero, technical terminology that belonged in military briefings, not casual conversation. Gary found his voice, though it came out smaller than usual. "Who are you?" "You can call me George." "Not my name is, not I am. You can call me." "George what?" Robert asked. "Just George." Robert pushed the rifle back across the counter toward the man. "Look, I don't know what this is, but if this is connected to classified operations, I legally can't work on it without proper authorization. Can't even appraise it." "I'm not asking you to work on it. I'm asking you what it's worth." Robert laughed, nervous now, uncomfortable in a way he couldn't quite name. "Worth? If this is authentic, if it's one of maybe a dozen surviving examples from a program that officially doesn't exist, collectors would pay 6 figures, maybe more. Museums would want it." "Then sell it for me." Gary stepped closer, emboldened by curiosity overcoming caution. "Why now? Why bring it in after all these years?" The man looked at Gary directly for the first time. His eyes were pale, almost colorless in the fluorescent light. "Because all these years, nobody was looking for it. Now someone is." As he said this, his right hand moved unconsciously to his left forearm, touched it through the fabric of his jacket sleeve. Brief contact, then away. Motion lasted less than a second, but Robert caught it. Robert's phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at the screen. Text message from an unknown number. "Who submitted serial inquiry GX1847-X at 11:34 a.m. Reply ASAP." Robert felt cold water run down his spine. He picked up the phone, read the message again, looked at the man called George. George was watching him. No surprise on his face, no concern, like he'd expected this. Robert showed him the screen. George read it. His expression didn't change. "You should close early today, and maybe don't answer that." Gary looked between them, confusion mixed with something approaching fear. "What is going on?" Robert didn't know how to answer that. He stared at the text message, at the rifle, at the man who called himself George. His hands were shaking slightly. He pressed them flat against the counter to stop the tremor. The phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. "This is a national security matter. Provide contact information for individual who presented firearm serial GX1847-X. Compliance is not optional." Robert set the phone down like it had become hot to touch. George remained perfectly still. Hadn't moved since placing the rifle on the counter. Hadn't shifted his weight. Hadn't looked away. The bell above the door chimed. Robert looked up. The 2 customers were leaving, faces showing confusion and discomfort. They left quickly without saying goodbye. Gary was still standing there, staring at George like he was trying to solve a puzzle written in a language he didn't speak. The shop felt smaller, walls closer, air thicker with tension that Robert couldn't name but could feel pressing against his chest. He picked up the rifle one more time, turned it over in his hands, looked at the serial number now fully visible beneath the cleaned section of metal. GX1847-X. 8 characters that apparently meant something to people who operated in places that didn't appear on maps. He set it down gently. "You're not selling this, are you?" Not a question. Statement of fact. No. Then why bring it here? George smiled. Thin, no warmth behind it. Because someone needed to verify what it was. Someone who would document it. Someone who would search databases and trigger alarms. Someone who would create a record that this rifle exists and that I'm still alive. Robert understood then, felt the understanding settle in his stomach like lead. You wanted them to know. I wanted witnesses. When they come, and they will come, I needed people who could verify what happened here, what you saw, what you confirmed. The phone buzzed a third time. Robert didn't pick it up. Could see the message preview on the lock screen. Federal agents en route to your location. Do not leave premises. Do not destroy evidence. Await arrival. He looked at George. They're coming here. I know. When? Soon. Gary backed away from the counter, survival instinct finally overcoming curiosity. I think I should go. No. The word wasn't loud, but it carried weight that stopped Gary mid-step. You should stay. You're a witness too. Gary froze, caught between wanting to leave and not wanting to disobey the command in George's voice. Robert felt his heart rate climbing, that fight-or-flight response he'd learned about in basic biology but never really understood until this moment. This is insane. I run a gun shop. I appraise firearms. I don't get involved in whatever this is. You got involved the moment you cleaned that serial number. There's no uninvolving yourself now. Outside, the sound of tires on gravel. A vehicle pulling into the parking lot. Robert looked through the front window. Black SUV, tinted windows, government plates. They're here. George didn't turn to look, kept his eyes on Robert. When they ask you questions, tell them the truth. What you saw, what you verified, nothing more. What are they going to do to you? That depends on how smart they are. The vehicle doors opened. Two men stepped out. Mid-40s, athletic builds, wearing civilian clothes that somehow screamed federal agent anyway. Wrong shoes, wrong watches, wrong way of scanning the environment before approaching. They walked toward the shop entrance, moving with the controlled awareness of people trained to assess threats. Robert couldn't move, couldn't think. His mind had gone blank except for one repeating thought looping through his head like a skipping record. What have I gotten into? The bell above the door chimed. The two men entered. They moved like operators, controlled and aware, eyes sweeping the shop in systematic patterns that covered every corner, every person, every potential threat. The first man smiled, pleasant, professional, practiced. Afternoon. We're looking for someone who might have inquired about a specific serial number today. Robert opened his mouth. No sound came out. The second man's gaze landed on the rifle lying on the counter. His expression flickered, recognition, then careful neutrality. That's interesting hardware. Mind if I ask where you got it? George stood from where he'd been leaning against the wall. He moved slowly, deliberately, every motion controlled and visible. Both men turned toward him, saw an elderly black man in canvas and denim, dismissed him immediately, looked back at Robert. Sir, we're going to need you to hand over any documentation related to that firearm and provide contact information for whoever brought it in. You're not taking anything. George's voice was quiet but different now. Authority underneath, command that didn't ask permission. The first man barely glanced at him. Sir, this doesn't concern you. Please step outside. GX 1847-X. Issued October 1973. Returned February 1977. That rifle has been in my possession for 49 years. You want documentation? I've got 49 years of it. The second man stopped moving. He turned to look at George, really look this time. His eyes scanned George's face, his posture, the way he held himself. Something changed in the agent's expression. What was your designation? He asked it carefully, tone shifting from dismissive to something approaching respect. Crosswind 6. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. The second man's hand moved reflexively, started to rise toward his head in what looked like the beginning of a salute. He caught himself halfway, lowered it slowly. Jesus Christ. He whispered it, barely audible. Robert looked between them, trying to understand what was happening, why the dynamic had shifted so completely. The first agent's face had gone pale. He pulled out his phone. "Sir, we need to make a call right now." The second agent didn't move, didn't break eye contact with George. "They told us you were dead. Training accident in '76. That's what the file said. I've read your file." George smiled, thin, humorless. "That's what the file was supposed to say. Easier to bury a program if all the operators are buried too." Gary found his voice, though it came out strangled. "What program? What are you talking about?" The second agent finally looked away from George, turned to Gary and Robert. "Operation Brushfire. Covert operations 1973 to 1977. Officially never happened. Personnel records sealed or destroyed. Most destroyed." "Some of us just disappeared," George corrected. The first agent was speaking rapidly into his phone now, stepped toward the back of the shop for privacy. His voice carried anyway. "Yes, sir. Crosswind 6. Alive. Confirmed. The rifle is here. Serial authenticated. Yes, sir. I'm looking at him right now." Gary looked between George and the agents, mouth opening and closing twice before words came out. "You're saying he was some kind of operator for the government?" The second agent didn't answer Gary. He was still watching George like he might vanish if he looked away. "How is this possible? We have documentation of your death, witnesses, a burial record." George rolled up his left sleeve slowly, deliberately. A scar became visible, long and jagged, ran from his wrist almost to his elbow. Old surgical scar, the kind left by shrapnel removal. Tissue was raised and discolored. Decades of healing had faded it, but not erased it. Shrapnel. February 12, 1977. Helicopter extraction under fire. Lost 2 teammates that day. Killed 11 hostiles at 900 meters with iron sights because the scope was shattered. He pointed at the rifle on the counter. "That barrel. That rifle. That mission." The second agent's hands were trembling slightly. "You're on the memorial wall. Building C. I've walked past your name 100 times. Probably still misspelled," George said flatly. The first agent returned, ended his call, looked at his partner with an expression that mixed confusion and something close to fear. "They want us to bring him in. Secure location. Immediate debriefing." George let his sleeve fall back down, covered the scar. "No." The first agent blinked. "Excuse me? I didn't surface after 50 years to get disappeared again. That rifle exists now. The serial is documented. Multiple witnesses in this room. If I vanish, questions get asked. So here's what happens instead. You leave. I keep the rifle. And when your superiors figure out they can't erase me twice, they can decide whether they want the story told quietly or loudly." The second agent looked at his partner. Some unspoken communication passed between them, years of working together compressed into a glance. The second agent turned back to George. This time his hand completed the motion it had started earlier. Full military salute. Crisp, held. George didn't return it, just nodded once. The agents moved toward the door. At the threshold, the second agent paused, looked back. "For what it's worth, sir, thank you for your service, even if nobody was supposed to know about it." The door closed behind them. Nobody moved. The shop had become a vacuum where sound felt wrong and time felt suspended. Gary exhaled long and shaky. "That just happened. That actually just happened." Robert couldn't speak. His mind was trying to process information that didn't fit into any framework he understood. The man standing in his shop had been dead for nearly 50 years. Except he wasn't dead. He was here and federal agents had just saluted him and walked away. George walked to the workbench, began gathering the rifle, wrapped it back in the wool blanket with careful, practiced movements. "I lied earlier. I'm not selling it. Just needed someone to verify what it was. Now it's verified." "Why?" Robert's voice cracked. "Why now? Why after all this time?" George stopped rapping, stood still for a moment. When he spoke, His voice carried weight that hadn't been there before. "Because they're dying. The men who ran brushfire, the officers who signed the orders, the intelligence handlers who planned the missions. They're old now. Dying. Taking the truth with them. I wanted someone to know that before the last of them goes, there's still one of us left who remembers." Gary stepped closer. Did you really do what you said?" George picked up the wrapped rifle, held it against his chest like something precious. 9 confirmed. 11 probable. All enemy combatants. All in defense of teammates who never made it home. He touched the rifle through the blanket. "This was my service. Nobody asked if I belonged there. The enemy sure as hell knew I did." He walked toward the door. The bell chimed as he opened it. Robert found himself moving. "Wait." George stopped. Didn't turn around. "What happens now?" "That depends on how many people believe you, and how loud you're willing to tell the story." He left. The door closed. The bell chimed again. Robert and Gary stood in silence, staring at the empty doorway. On the workbench, something caught the light. Robert walked over, found a single brass casing sitting where the rifle had been. George must have left it there while wrapping the weapon. He picked it up, turned it over in his fingers. Stamped on the base, 7.62 by 51 millimeters NATO, 1974. Physical proof. Tangible evidence. A relic from operations that officially never happened. Gary moved beside him, looked at the casing. "You believe him?" Robert set the casing down gently. "Yeah, I do." "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." His phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. "Do not discuss this incident with anyone. National security protocols in effect. Violation will result in federal prosecution." Robert showed it to Gary. Gary laughed, nervous and high-pitched. "They're threatening you now." "Apparently." "You going to listen?" Robert looked at the brass casing, at the photograph tucked behind the register, at the locked filing cabinet in the corner that suddenly seemed important in a way it hadn't been an hour ago. "I don't know." Gary left 20 minutes later, told Robert he needed a drink. Maybe several drinks. Maybe an entire bottle. Robert locked the door after him, flipped the sign to closed even though it was only 1 in the afternoon. He stood in the empty shop. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Smell of gun solvent and metal polish hung in the air like it always did. Everything looked the same. Nothing was the same. Robert walked to the filing cabinet, stared at it. The lock was old. Probably could be picked with the right tools. He had the tools. Grew up learning locks as part of gunsmith training, understanding mechanisms, how things fit together. He didn't pick the lock. Instead, he opened the drawer beneath the cash register. Found the spare key ring his grandfather kept there. 7 keys. Most he recognized. Building keys, gun safe keys, display case keys. 1 he didn't recognize. Small brass. Looked like it fit a filing cabinet. Robert walked to the cabinet, tried the key. It turned. The lock clicked. The drawer slid open. Inside were files, manila folders, dozens of them, organized by year. Labels written in precise handwriting. Deployment records, requisition orders, mission summaries. Robert pulled out a folder at random, opened it. Weapons requisition form dated April 1974. Requesting delivery of specialized ammunition. 7.62 NATO match grade, suppressed load specifications. Delivery location listed as Firebase Hotel. Coordinates redacted, blacked out with heavy marker. Authorization signature illegible but stamped with a seal Robert didn't recognize. He pulled another folder. Mission debrief, August 1975. Target eliminated at long range. Positive identification confirmed. Team extraction successful. No casualties. Operator designation, Crosswind 6. Robert set the folder down. His hands were shaking again. His grandfather's shop hadn't just been a gun shop. It had been a depot, a supply point for covert operations. Daniel Mercer had been part of this, part of Brushfire. The photograph behind the register. Robert pulled it out, looked at it again with new understanding. 7 figures in uniform standing beside wooden crates, jungle clearing, faces obscured. One figure slightly shorter than the others, posture he now recognized. George, 49 years ago, standing with his team. Robert turned the photograph over. Handwriting on the back, faded but legible. Crosswind Unit, April 1975. After Firebase Hotel resupply. May they all come home. They hadn't all come home. Robert sat down at the counter, put his head in his hands, tried to process information that kept expanding beyond his ability to contain it. His phone rang. Actual call this time, not text. Unknown number. He answered. Hello? The voice that came through was older, authoritative, military cadence, even in retirement. Mr. Williams, my name is Colonel Ryan Robinson, retired. I understand you had an encounter today that raised some questions. Robert's throat felt tight. I don't know what I'm allowed to say. You're allowed to listen. The man who visited your shop, he was part of a program that saved American lives. Operators who went places we couldn't officially go, did things we couldn't officially acknowledge. When the program ended, they were given a choice: disappear into new identities with full support, or face congressional hearings that would have destroyed them and exposed methods we still use today. Most chose to disappear. And now he's surfacing. Because we're dying. The colonel's voice carried something Robert couldn't quite name. Regret, maybe, or the weight of time running out. The men who know what really happened, what those operators sacrificed. We're old. Cancer, heart disease, time. The truth dies with us if someone doesn't speak. Why me? Why bring the rifle to me? Because your grandfather ran supply operations for brush fire. Because your shop has documentation that proves the program existed. Because you're young enough to remember and tell the story after we're all gone. Robert closed his eyes. What do you want from me? Tell the truth. When the time comes, when it's safe, tell people what you verified today. That the rifle exists, that the cereal is real, that the man who carried it is real. What if they don't believe me? They will. We're working on declassification. Partial, limited, but enough. Within a few months, some of brush fire will be public record. When that happens, your testimony will matter. You'll be a witness to history. And if I refuse, then good people stay erased, and that would be a shame. The line went dead. Robert sat motionless. The shop felt like it was pressing in on him. Too small, too quiet. He looked at the brass casing on the workbench, at the photograph, at the open filing cabinet full of secrets his grandfather had told him were nothing important. His entire understanding of his family's legacy had been built on half-truths and comfortable lies. The gun shop was just a gun shop. Daniel Mercer was just a businessman. The old rotary phone was just decoration. The filing cabinet was just old inventory records. All of it false. Or not false exactly. Omissions. Things left unsaid because saying them would have shattered the illusion of normalcy. Robert stood, walked to the rotary phone, stared at it. In 643 days it had never rung. Now it felt like it was about to, like expectation alone could will it into action. It didn't ring. He walked back to the counter, picked up the brass casing, held it up to the light. Metal caught the fluorescent glow, stamp numbers crisp despite being 50 years old. Quality manufacturing, military precision. Someone had fired this round. Someone had loaded it into a rifle, aimed, calculated wind and distance and breathing, squeezed a trigger. Someone had watched through a scope as the bullet traveled 900 meters and ended a life. That someone was an elderly black man who moved slowly and spoke quietly and had been officially dead for 49 years. Robert set the casing down, picked up his phone, opened the notes application, started typing. November 14th. Man identifying himself as George brought rifle to shop. Serial GX1847-X verified as experimental military platform. Database search triggered federal response. 2 agents arrived, confirmed man's identity as Crosswind 6 operator in classified program Operation Brushfire. Man displayed knowledge of military operations, specific technical terminology, visible shrapnel scar consistent with combat injury. Agents rendered salute before departing. He saved the note, backed it up to cloud storage, sent a copy to his personal email. Documentation, evidence, testimony. The bell above the door chimed. Robert looked up, heart racing, hand moving instinctively toward the pistol he kept under the register. An old man entered. 80s, moving with a cane, wore a faded army jacket with patches on the shoulders Robert didn't recognize. The man looked around the shop. His eyes landed on the filing cabinet, on the photograph now sitting on the counter, on Robert. "You're the grandson." Not a question. Statement. "Yes. Your grandfather was a good man. Helped us when nobody else would. Who are you?" The man moved closer slowly, each step deliberate. "You had a visitor today. Man with a rifle. How do you know that?" "Because I got a phone call an hour ago from someone who said Crosswind 6 was alive, and I had to see for myself if it was true." "You know him?" The old man nodded. "Served with him. February 77. I was the pilot who extracted his team. Took ground fire on approach. He covered our landing from a ridge position. Never seen shooting like that. 11 targets, maybe 90 seconds. Perfect shots, every one." He looked at the photograph. "That's us. That picture. I'm third from the left." Robert picked up the photograph, looked at the figure the man indicated. Taller than the others, posture that suggested military bearing even through the blur. "You were there. 4 tours, most of them places I can't talk about. Most with people whose names I'm not supposed to remember. But I remember him. Crosswind 6. Best operator I ever flew for." "Why are you here?" "Because if he's surfacing, it means something's happening. Declassification maybe. Recognition. And if that's coming, there are things you should know. Things about your grandfather. About what this place really was." The man reached into his jacket, pulled out an envelope. Yellow with age, sealed. "Your grandfather gave me this in 78. Told me if anything ever happened to him, if anyone ever started asking questions about brushfire, I should give this to whoever was running the shop. Said they'd know what to do with it." He handed the envelope to Robert. The seal was still intact. Robert's grandfather's handwriting on the front. "To whoever carries the name forward." What's in it? The truth, or as much of it as could be written down. Names, dates, operations. Things that prove what happened. Things that prove those operators were real. Why didn't you open it? Because it wasn't addressed to me, and because some truths are dangerous. Your grandfather knew that. He made sure the information survived but stayed hidden until it was safe. The man turned toward the door, paused. "Tell him I remember. Tell Crosswind 6 that Pelican 3 remembers, and that I'm glad he made it home." He left. The bell chimed. The door closed. Robert stood holding the envelope. Paper felt fragile, like it might disintegrate if he gripped too hard. He set it on the counter, stared at it. Around him the shop continued its existence. Fluorescent lights humming, gun oil smell, afternoon sun slanting through windows. Everything normal. Everything changed. Robert picked up the envelope, broke the seal. Inside were photographs, documents, handwritten notes, a ledger listing weapons and ammunition with dates and destinations, maps with coordinates marked, after-action reports typed on ancient typewriters, and a letter addressed to no one, signed by his grandfather. If you're reading this, someone finally asked the right questions. Someone finally started connecting pieces that were supposed to stay separated. Good. What we did was necessary. The operators who served in brushfire saved American lives. They operated in conditions that would break most people. They succeeded in missions that had no backup plans. And when the program ended, they were abandoned, given new names, new lives, told to forget. But some things shouldn't be forgotten. Some sacrifices deserve recognition, even if that recognition comes 50 years late. This shop was part of the supply chain. I provided weapons, ammunition, specialized equipment. I knew some of the operators, knew what they were doing even if I couldn't say it out loud. They were heroes. Every one of them. If the time has come to tell their story, tell it right. Tell it complete. Don't let politics or bureaucracy erase what they did. The envelope also contained a key, small brass, different from the filing cabinet key. Attached to it was a note, safe deposit box, First National Bank, Knoxville, Box 347. More documentation inside. Use when the time is right. Robert set everything down, looked at the collection of evidence spread across the counter. Photographs of young soldiers in jungle fatigues, documents stamped, classified and secret, and eyes only. Names he didn't recognize but which carried weight anyway. His phone buzzed. Text message, George. The pilot came to see you. Good, you're starting to understand. When they announce declassification, you'll be ready. Thank you for believing. Robert typed a response. Why me? Why involve me in this? The reply came quickly. Because your grandfather trusted you with his legacy, even if you didn't know it yet. Because you verified the truth when it would have been easier to dismiss it. Because witnesses matter. And because I'm tired of being dead. Robert sat down, exhaustion hitting him like physical weight. The day had started normally. Coffee at 6, security check, cleaning display cases. Now he was holding evidence of classified operations and communicating with a man who had been erased from history. The rotary phone rang. Robert jumped, stared at it. The sound was harsh, mechanical, wrong for the modern world. It rang again. He stood, walked to it, picked up the receiver. Hello? Static, then a voice. Male, older, formal. This line has been inactive for 38 years. If it's ringing now, it means someone activated the emergency protocol. Is this the grandson? Yes. Then listen carefully. Operation Brushfire is being partially declassified. Public announcement in 6 weeks. Congressional hearing in 8 weeks. We need witnesses who can verify the program existed. People with documentation, people with credibility. Your grandfather set this up decades ago, a fail-safe. If the operators ever needed validation, this phone would ring and whoever answered would become their advocate. Who is this? Someone who owes them everything. Be ready. When the hearing happens, you'll be called to testify. Bring the documentation. Bring the rifle serial verification. Bring the truth. The line went dead. Robert set the receiver down. His hand was shaking. The shop had gone quiet again. That vacuum silence, like the building itself, was holding its breath. He looked at everything spread across the counter. Evidence, testimony, truth. 6 weeks until public announcement. 8 weeks until congressional hearing. 8 weeks to prepare to tell the world about people who had been ghosts for 50 years. Robert picked up the photograph one more time, studied the faces he could not quite see. The team standing in a jungle clearing beside wooden crates. Young people doing dangerous things in places they were not supposed to be. One of them was still alive, still fighting, still demanding recognition. And now Robert was part of that fight whether he had chosen it or not. The brass casing caught the light again, glinted, small and significant. A bullet fired 50 years ago that was still finding its target. Robert closed the filing cabinet, gathered the documents from the envelope, locked them in the safe beneath the register. Tomorrow he would go to the bank, retrieve whatever was in box 347, start organizing evidence, start preparing testimony. Tonight he would sit in the quiet shop and try to understand how his entire understanding of his family history had been rewritten in 6 hours. The photograph went back on the wall, properly framed now, labeled. Crosswind Unit, April 1975. Honored. The brass casing went into a small display case mounted on velvet. Caption card beneath it. 7.62 NATO, 1974. Operation Brushfire. Fired in defense of American lives. carried home by Crosswind 6. Physical proof, tangible evidence, truth made visible. 3 days passed. Robert spent most of that time in the back office, organizing documentation that had been hidden for decades. The safe deposit box at First National Bank had contained exactly what his grandfather's note promised: mission reports, deployment records, photographs of operators whose faces were finally clear, names that matched designations. Crosswind 6 was listed as Sergeant George Harris, 27 years old when he deployed, 31 when he vanished. The declassification announcement came on a Tuesday morning in January. Department of Defense press release. Brief, clinical. Operation Brushfire acknowledged as a limited counterinsurgency program conducted between 1973 and 1977 in Southeast Asia Theater. Personnel records partially unsealed. Congressional hearing scheduled for February 15th to review the program and consider formal recognition of operators. Robert's phone rang within an hour of the announcement. Colonel Robinson again told him the hearing would require testimony from witnesses who could verify the program's existence independent of government records. Told him to prepare a statement. Told him to bring physical evidence. Told him this was important. Robert said he would be there. The next call came from an unfamiliar number. Female voice, professional. Mr. Williams, this is Congresswoman Angela Torres. I'm chairing the committee investigating Operation Brushfire. Colonel Robinson spoke highly of your documentation. We'd like you to testify. I'll be there. Good. Bring everything you have. And Mr. Williams, what you're doing matters. These people deserve to be remembered. 4 days later, a package arrived at the shop. No return address. Inside was a letter from George, handwritten. Script was precise, almost mechanical. Thank you for keeping faith. The rifle has been donated to the Smithsonian as planned. They are building an exhibit around it. Operation Brushfire, Shadows and Service opens in March. You should come to the dedication. You earned that. The letter included a photograph. Recent, showed the rifle under museum lighting, cleaned and preserved, displayed on a stand with a placard that read GX1847-X. Sniper platform used in covert operations, 1973 to 1977, carried by Sergeant George Harris, Crosswind-6. His name, his real name, no longer hidden. Robert placed the photograph on the wall beside the old picture of the Crosswind unit. 2 images separated by 50 years, same man, different contexts, one hidden in shadow, one brought into light. The shop felt different now. Customers still came in looking for ammunition, asking about used rifles. But Robert no longer dismissed things based on appearance alone. He asked questions. He listened. He examined everything carefully before making judgments. Gary came by twice a week, never mentioned what happened that day in November, but he looked at the photographs on the wall, at the brass casing in its display case, at Robert with something resembling respect. February 15th arrived cold and clear. Robert drove to Washington the day before, checked into a hotel near Capitol Hill. Didn't sleep well, kept reviewing his prepared statement, kept thinking about the weight of speaking truth that had been buried for half a century. The hearing room was smaller than he expected. Wood-paneled walls, rows of seats for observers, a long table at the front where 5 Congresspeople sat. Camera crews positioned along the sides, maybe 40 people in attendance. Robert arrived early, sat in the back, watched people file in, recognized some faces from the photographs. Old men now, 80s. Some in wheelchairs, some walking with canes, all wearing pieces of their service. A jacket with unit patches, a cap with faded insignia. Visible pride mixed with decades of enforced silence. At 9:15 George entered. He wore a simple dark suit, hair pulled back, walked with the same deliberate precision Robert remembered. But something was different. His shoulders were straighter, his head higher, like a weight had been lifted. He sat in the front row, didn't look around, didn't acknowledge anyone, just sat with his hands folded in his lap and waited. The hearing began at 9:30. The committee chair, Congresswoman Torres, spoke first, acknowledged the difficulty of the subject matter, acknowledged the decades of silence, acknowledged the sacrifice of operators who served without recognition. Then she called the first witness. A retired general, 82 years old, moved to the witness table with help from an aide. Testified about the strategic necessity of brush fire, the lives saved, the intelligence gathered, the missions accomplished. He spoke for 20 minutes. His voice was strong despite his age. When he finished, he looked directly at the front row. At George, nodded once. The second witness was the pilot, Timothy Clark, Pelican 3, testified about extraction missions, about operators working in conditions that violated every safety protocol, about professionalism under fire, about a specific mission in February 1977 where an operator provided covering fire that saved his entire crew. He didn't name George, didn't need to. Everyone in the room knew who he meant. The third witness was Robert. He walked to the table, set down the folder containing his documentation, took the oath, sat. Congresswoman Torres asked him to state his name and relationship to Operation Brushfire. My name is Robert Williams. I own a firearms shop in Tennessee that was operated by my grandfather during the brushfire era. In November of last year, a man brought a rifle to my shop for verification. The rifle bore serial number GX1847-X. Database searches identified it as classified military hardware. The man identified himself as the operator to whom the rifle was issued. Federal agents arrived within hours and confirmed his identity. I subsequently discovered documentation in my grandfather's files proving his shop served as a supply depot for brushfire operations. The chair asked if he brought physical evidence. Robert opened the folder, removed the brass casing in its protective case, held it up. This casing was left by the operator, dated 1974, 7.62 NATO, fired during a mission that is documented in the files my grandfather maintained. He set it on the table, removed the photographs. The Crosswind Unit in 1975, weapons requisitions, mission reports, after-action summaries, set them all on the table. This is proof that Operation Brushfire existed, that operators served, that they accomplished missions, that they deserve recognition. The committee members examined the evidence, passed documents between them, asked questions about authentication, about chain of custody, about how Robert knew the documents were genuine. Because my grandfather was meticulous, because he knew someday the truth would need proof, because he believed these people mattered. The chair nodded. Thank you, Mr. Williams. This documentation will be entered into the official record. Robert returned to his seat. His hands were shaking. Adrenaline and relief mixed together. The chair called the final witness, Sergeant George Harris, Crosswind 6. The room went silent. George stood, walked to the witness table, moved with that same controlled precision, sat, took the oath. His voice was steady. The chair spoke carefully. Sergeant Harris, thank you for your willingness to testify. We understand this is difficult given the circumstances of your service and subsequent erasure from official records. For the record, can you confirm your identity and service designation? My name is George Harris. I served as Crosswind 6 in Operation Brushfire from October 1973 to February 1977. I was a sniper. I completed 42 missions, 9 confirmed eliminations, 11 probable, all enemy combatants, all in defense of American personnel. The chair continued. The committee has reviewed declassified mission reports that reference your designation. However, official personnel records list you as killed in a training accident in 1976. Can you explain this discrepancy? George's expression didn't change. When brushfire was terminated, operators were given 2 options: face congressional inquiry that would expose operational methods still in use, or accept new identities and disappear. I chose disappearance. My death was fabricated to facilitate that transition. Why come forward now? Because the men who made that choice possible are dying. Because their families deserve to know what their service meant. Because I'm tired of being a ghost. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. First sign of emotion Robert had seen from him. The committee members conferred quietly. Then the chair spoke again. "Sergeant Harris, this committee recognizes your service and sacrifice. We acknowledge the extraordinary circumstances under which you operated and the injustice of your erasure from official recognition. It is the recommendation of this committee that you and your fellow brushfire operators be awarded the Intelligence Star for valor in clandestine operations." The room erupted, not in chaos, in silence, complete silence. Then one person stood, one of the old men in the front row. He raised his hand in salute. Crisp, military perfect. Another stood. Another salute. Within 30 seconds, every veteran in the room was standing, hands raised, honoring a man who had been dead for 50 years. George remained seated, didn't return the salutes, but his eyes moved across the faces, recognizing some, remembering. The committee chair stood as well. Other members followed, not saluting, but standing, showing respect through the only gesture available. The moment held. 10 seconds, 20, 30. Then George stood, nodded once to the room, turned and walked out. The hearing adjourned. Robert sat frozen, watching the veterans lower their hands, watching them sit, watching them wipe their eyes with the backs of their hands. Gary was there, sitting 3 rows ahead. He turned, looked at Robert, nodded. Understanding passed between them without words. Outside the hearing room, Robert found George standing alone in the hallway. He was looking out a window at the city below, hands clasped behind his back, military posture even now. That was brave. George didn't turn. It was overdue. What happens now? Memorial service at Arlington next month. They're adding names to the Brushfire Memorial. 17 of us are still alive. We'll be there. And after that? George finally looked at him, smiled, small, genuine. After that, I stop hiding. Maybe write a book. Maybe just live quietly, knowing the truth is finally recorded. Either way, I'm done being erased. Robert extended his hand. Thank you for trusting me. George shook it. His grip was firm. Thank you for believing when it would have been easier not to. He walked away down the hallway into the crowd of veterans gathering near the elevators. One of them, the pilot Timothy Clark, embraced him, brief, respectful. Then others surrounded him, talking, remembering, honoring. Robert returned to Tennessee the next day. The shop looked the same but felt different, like it had crossed some threshold into new purpose. He spent the following week reorganizing the space, moved the filing cabinet from the corner to the wall behind the counter, unlocked it permanently, labeled it Historical Archive, Operation Brushfire. Customers could see it now, could ask questions, could learn. The rotary phone stayed on the wall, silent again. But Robert no longer thought of it as decoration. It was a reminder that some connections transcend time, that some truths wait decades to surface. The photographs multiplied. The original image of the Crosswind unit was joined by newer pictures. George at the Congressional hearing. The rifle in the Smithsonian. A group photo from the Arlington Memorial Service showing 17 aging operators standing in formation one last time. Robert added a new photograph to the collection, taken at the museum dedication in March. Showed George standing beside the rifle display, his hand resting on the glass case, looking at the weapon that had defined 4 years of his life and 49 years of his silence. In the photograph, he was smiling. 3 months after the hearing, a young woman entered the shop. Early 20s, nervous, carried a worn duffel bag. My grandmother passed away last month. She told me if I ever needed money, I should bring this to someone who'd understand what it meant. She wrote down this address. She pulled out an old M1911 pistol. Tarnished, grip worn smooth, serial number barely visible. Robert looked at it, looked at her, saw the uncertainty in her eyes, the expectation of dismissal. He reached for the brass brush and solvent. Let me take a look. As he cleaned the serial number, the woman watched. Did you know my grandmother? No, but your grandmother knew something important. The serial emerged letter by letter, number by number. Standard military issue, 1943. Based on wear patterns, probably saw combat. Europe or Pacific. Not rare, not experimental, but important. This belonged to someone who served, someone who carried it through something difficult. That makes it valuable regardless of what collectors might pay. The woman's shoulders relaxed. How much is it worth? Robert set down the brush. To a collector, maybe $800. To you, much more. This is your family's history. Your grandmother wanted you to have it. I'd recommend keeping it. Let it remind you where you came from. She smiled, tears forming. Thank you. After she left, Robert stood at the counter looking at the space around him, the photographs on the walls, the archive cabinet with its documented history, the brass casing in its case, the rotary phone silent on the wall. The shop had become something his grandfather intended but never lived to see, a place where hidden stories surfaced, where dismissed things found value, where truth mattered more than convenience. At 5:47, Robert began his closing routine. Same as the opening, but different now. He moved through the space with less arrogance, more purpose, wiped down the display cases in horizontal strokes, checked the security footage, made notes in the ledger. Before leaving, he stood at the wall of photographs, looked at the image of George at the museum, at the crosswind unit in the jungle, at the memorial service at Arlington, 17 operators, 17 lives erased and then restored, 17 people who served in silence and were finally honored in light. Robert picked up the brass casing, turned it over in his fingers. 7.62 NATO, 1974. Fired 50 years ago. Carried home, preserved, displayed, physical proof that some truths survive. He set it back in its case, turned off the lights, locked the door. Outside, the Tennessee evening was settling into darkness. Stars emerging overhead. Highway quiet. World continuing its existence around the small gun shop that had become a repository of secrets transformed into history. Robert sat in his truck for a moment before starting the engine. Looked back at the shop, at the dark windows, at the sign that read, Mercer and Sons Firearms. 3 generations, 3 purposes. Supply depot, gun shop, memorial. His phone buzzed. Message from George. Saw your name in the museum credits. They listed you as historical consultant. Thought you should know the exhibit is getting 20,000 visitors a month. People want to know the stories. Thank you for making sure those stories could be told. Robert typed a reply. It was an honor. Thank you for trusting me with the truth. He started the engine, drove home through the dark. Thinking about rust-covered rifles and hidden archives and the weight of carrying secrets for 50 years. Thinking about the courage required to surface after decades of erasure. Thinking about his grandfather's careful planning and patient faith that someday the truth would matter. The next morning at 5:47, Robert unlocked the shop. Same routine, same timing. But when he looked at the space now, he saw more than inventory and transactions. He saw responsibility. He saw purpose. He saw connection to something larger than himself. A customer arrived at 9, brought in a rifle for appraisal, looked rough, worn, possibly worthless. Robert didn't laugh, didn't dismiss. He picked it up carefully, examined it thoroughly, asked questions, listened to the story behind it, because he had learned that value hides in unexpected places, that history lives in objects people overlook, that everyone's story deserves to be heard before judgment is made. The brass casing caught the morning light, glinted, reminded him. Some bullets travel 50 years before hitting their target. Some truths wait decades before finding their moment. Some people live entire lifetimes in shadow before stepping into light. And some gun shops in small Tennessee towns become something more than they appear. Become witnesses, become archives, become proof that silence eventually breaks and erasure eventually fails and truth eventually surfaces. The photographs on the wall told that story. Past and present integrated, hidden and revealed, ghost and human. Crosswind 6, and George Harris. The same man. Both versions real. Both versions honored. Robert stood at the counter, looked at the rifle in his hands, looked at the customer waiting for his assessment, looked at the space that had taught him to see beyond surface appearances. And he began his examination the way he now began everything. Carefully. Respectfully. With the understanding that what seems worthless might be priceless, that what appears broken might be whole, that what looks like ending might be beginning. The morning light filled the shop, smell of gun oil and old wood, the photographs watching, the archive open, the truth preserved, and somewhere in that light, the memory of an elderly man placing a rust-covered rifle on a counter and quietly changing everything. Senator Donald Thomas sat in his office on Capitol Hill, watching the news coverage of the brushfire hearing. His hands trembled. 48 years he'd kept that operation buried. 48 years of careful maneuvering, of destroyed documents, of silenced witnesses, all undone by one rifle and one man who refused to stay dead. His phone rang. Chief of Staff. Senator, the committee is requesting your testimony. They have evidence you approved faulty intelligence in February 1977. 3 operators died. The reports were falsified. Thomas closed his eyes. When? Next week. They're calling it a fact-finding mission, but we both know what it is. Thomas hung up, looked at the photograph on his desk. Him in uniform, 1977, young, ambitious, willing to cut corners to advance a career. 3 men died because he approved an operation without proper reconnaissance, and then he'd buried it, called it a training accident, erased the evidence. Except the evidence hadn't been erased. Daniel Mercer kept records. George Harris survived. And now the truth was coming for him. His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. You destroyed careers to hide your mistake. You won't destroy mine. See you at the hearing. George Harris. Thomas deleted the message, but the words stayed. The hearing the following week was smaller. Closed session. Only committee members, witnesses, essential staff. Thomas testified first. Denied everything. Called the allegations politically motivated. Claimed he had no knowledge of operational failures. Then they brought out the documents. Mission reports with his signature. Intelligence assessments he'd approved without verification. After-action reports he'd personally altered. Congresswoman Torres looked at him with something approaching contempt. Senator Thomas, we have testimony from 3 surviving operators who were on the ground in February 1977. They confirm the intelligence was faulty. They confirm you were warned. They confirm you proceeded anyway because you wanted the operation on your record before your promotion. Thomas's lawyer leaned in, whispered something. Thomas ignored him. Those operators were operating outside legal authority. Their testimony is inadmissible. Their testimony is backed by documentation from a civilian supplier. Daniel Mercer kept meticulous records, including communications with you expressing concern about the operation's viability. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were letters, Thomas's handwriting, telling Daniel to proceed with weapons shipment despite concerns, telling him the operation was politically necessary. Thomas felt the floor drop out from under him. These records were supposed to be destroyed. Torres smiled. Cold. Mr. Mercer apparently didn't get that memo. Senator, you have 2 options. Resign immediately with a public apology to the brushfire families, or face formal investigation and likely criminal charges for falsifying military records and obstruction of justice. Thomas stood. His legs felt unsteady. I'll need to consult with counsel. You have 48 hours. Thomas left the hearing room, walked through the Capitol halls that had been his domain for 23 years, knew he was walking them for the last time. 2 days later, his resignation letter appeared on news sites. Brief, clinical. Due to health concerns and family considerations, I am resigning my Senate seat effective immediately. I apologize to the families affected by operational decisions I made in 1977. I take full responsibility. No mention of the real reason, no acknowledgement of the cover-up. But everyone knew. George read the resignation letter on his phone, sitting in the small house he'd bought outside Knoxville. First real home he'd had in 49 years. No more hiding. No more aliases. His grandson Kenneth sat beside him doing homework. 8 years old, smart kid, looked like his father, George's son, who'd died never knowing the truth. Kenneth looked up. "Grandpa, did you really shoot 11 people?" George set down his phone. "I did." "Were they bad people?" "They were trying to kill my friends. So yes, in that moment they were." "Are you a hero?" George thought about that. Thought about the weight of those 11 lives. Thought about the teammates who didn't make it home. Thought about 49 years of silence. "I tried to be, buddy. I tried to be." Kenneth went back to his homework. George looked around the small house. Simple furniture, nothing fancy. But it was his, under his real name. No more hiding. His phone buzzed. Text from Robert. Saw the resignation. Justice isn't always fast, but it comes. George smiled. Typed back. "Thank you for being the witness I needed. Your grandfather would be proud." The museum dedication happened on a Saturday in March. Warm day, unusual for early spring. The Smithsonian had built an entire room around the brush fire exhibit. George stood in front of the display case containing his rifle. Cleaned now, preserved. The serial number clearly visible under museum lighting. GX1847-X. The placard beside it read, Sergeant George Harris, Crosswind, 6 Operation Brushfire, 1973 to 1977. 9 confirmed eliminations in defense of American lives, officially declared dead. 1976. Truth revealed 20. 25. Kenneth stood beside him, staring at the rifle with wide eyes. "That's really yours?" "Was mine. Belongs to history now." Robert was there too, along with Timothy Clark and 6 other surviving brushfire operators. They stood together, old men who'd been young warriors, looking at their service finally acknowledged. A museum curator approached George. "Mr. Harris, we're getting requests for interviews. PBS wants to do a documentary. 2 publishers want to discuss a book deal. Are you interested?" George looked at the rifle behind glass, at his name on the placard, at his grandson holding his hand. "Let me think about it." The curator nodded, moved away. Timothy Clark stepped beside George. "You going to do it? Tell the whole story?" "Maybe. People should know what we did, who we were, not just the missions, the cost. The nightmares. The nightmares. The marriages that failed, the kids who grew up with fathers who couldn't talk about where they'd been, the 49 years of pretending to be someone else." Timothy was quiet for a moment. "But we mattered." "Yes, we mattered." Robert returned to Tennessee with a sense of completion. The museum dedication had felt like closing a chapter. The story was told. The truth was public. George and the other operators were recognized. But 3 days after returning, another elderly black man entered the shop. Late 70s. Walked with difficulty. Carried a small box. "You the one who helped George Harris?" Robert looked up from the rifle he was cleaning. "I verified his service, yes. I got something similar. Was told to bring it here if I ever wanted the truth told." He set the box on the counter. Inside was a combat knife. Old, handle worn, blade etched with symbols Robert didn't recognize. "Crosswind 4. That was me. Marcus Cole. They said I died in 75. Been living under another name ever since. But if George can surface, maybe I can too." Robert felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't over. There were more stories, more operators, more truths waiting to surface. He reached for the brass brush. "Tell me about the knife." And Marcus began to speak. Over the next 6 months, 4 more brushfire operators surfaced. Each one brought evidence. Each one told their story. Each one had been erased and was choosing to return. Robert documented them all, took statements, verified service records, connected them with the committee investigating brushfire. The shop became a hub, a gathering place. Operators would come to see the photographs on the wall, to talk with others who understood, to finally speak truths they'd carried for decades. Gary came by one afternoon, found 3 elderly men sitting in the shop, drinking coffee, talking about missions in places they still couldn't name on maps. "This is what the shop is now?" Robert smiled. "This is what it always was. We just didn't know it." In April, Margaret Wilson published her memoir, Crosswind, The Woman They Erased. It became a bestseller within 2 weeks. She did interviews, spoke at military academies, became the face of female operators who'd served in silence. She came to the shop in May, wanted to see the archive, wanted to meet Robert. "Your grandfather saved my life more than once, not just with weapons, with documentation, with proof I existed." She looked at the photographs on the wall. "This is important work you're doing, giving us back our histories. I'm just the witness. Witnesses change everything." Robert had heard that before, from Colonel Robinson, from George, now from Margaret. The phrase kept recurring like a mantra. Witnesses matter. Witnesses change history. Witnesses make truth real. He'd stumbled into this role, hadn't chosen it, but now he understood it was the most important thing he'd ever do. In June, the Smithsonian expanded the brushfire exhibit, added a wall with photographs of all known operators, 17 living, 28 confirmed dead, 12 still missing, status unknown. George's photograph was first. Below it, his citation for the Intelligence Star. "For extraordinary valor in conducting precision operations in denied areas, 1973 to 1977. Sergeant Harris eliminated 9 confirmed hostile combatants and provided covering fire that enabled the safe extraction of multiple teams under enemy contact. His service, conducted without official recognition, exemplifies the highest standards of duty and sacrifice." Kenneth asked to have the citation printed and framed, hung it in his room, told his classmates his great-grandfather was a hero. George tried to downplay it, told Kenneth heroes were people who rushed into burning buildings, who saved lives, who did extraordinary things. Kenneth looked at him with 8-year-old certainty. "You did all those things, Grandpa?" And George couldn't argue with that. The first anniversary of the hearing came in February. The committee held a ceremony at Arlington. All 17 surviving operators attended. Families of the 28 dead were there too. Children and grandchildren of men who died without their families knowing the truth. Robert stood in the back, watching. He'd been invited to sit with the families but preferred to observe from distance. This wasn't his moment. This was theirs. George spoke briefly. His voice carried across the cemetery. "We served in places we can't name, did things we can't fully describe, lost friends we couldn't mourn publicly. For 49 years we were ghosts. But today, we're real. Our service is real. Our sacrifice is real. And our brothers who didn't make it home are finally honored." He paused, looked at the memorial wall with its 28 names. "To the ones who fell, we remember. We always did, even when no one else could." The ceremony ended with a rifle salute, 7 shots. The sound echoed across Arlington, across decades, across all the silence that had finally broken. Robert drove back to Tennessee feeling something he couldn't quite name. Peace, maybe, or completion, or the understanding that his grandfather's legacy had been fulfilled in ways Daniel Mercer never anticipated. The shop continued, business as usual. People brought in guns for appraisal, for repair, for sale. Robert treated each one carefully, listened to each story, because he'd learned that every object carried history, every person carried truth, and sometimes those truths needed witnesses. On a quiet Tuesday in March, exactly 1 year after the museum dedication, the rotary phone rang. Robert stared at it. The phone hadn't rung since Colonel Robinson's call 18 months ago. He picked up the receiver. "Mercer and Sons." The voice on the other end was young, female, uncertain. Is this the place that helps people tell their stories about military service? It is. My father passed away last month, left me a box of things, documents, photographs, a rifle, and a note that said if I ever wanted to know the truth, I should call this number. Robert felt the familiar weight settle in his chest. Another story, another truth waiting to surface. What was your father's name? James Miller. But he told my mother once, a long time ago, that wasn't his real name, that he'd been someone else before I was born. Robert grabbed a pen and paper. Tell me everything. And she did. The stories kept coming, one by one. Operators surfacing, families discovering truths, children learning their parents had been erased and were choosing to return. Robert documented them all. The shop became an archive, a memorial, a place where silence transformed into speech. George came by every few weeks, sometimes with Kenneth, sometimes alone. He'd sit at the counter, drink coffee, talk about nothing in particular, but his presence said everything. You believed me when no one else did. You gave me back my name. You made me real again. On Kenneth's 9th birthday, George brought him to the shop, showed him the photographs on the wall, the archive cabinet, the brass casing in its case. This is where our story started coming back. This is where a young man chose truth over comfort. Remember that, Kenneth. When you see injustice, when you see erasure, be the witness. Speak the truth even when it's hard. Kenneth nodded. Serious. Understanding more than a 9-year-old should have to understand. Robert watched them leave, grandfather and grandson, walking into afternoon sunlight, carrying a history that was finally theirs to claim. He turned back to the shop, to the photographs, to the archive, to the rotary phone silent on the wall, waiting for the next call. The brass casing caught the light, glinted, reminded him. Every story deserves a witness. Every truth deserves to be told. Every person erased deserves to be remembered. And in a small gun shop in Tennessee, those truths found their voice.